in the 90s, when I started having more sort of broader success, it was so unexpected, and it played to all of my, and maybe this is very, very obvious, but it played to all of my insecurities. It played to my lack of self-worth, my feelings of inadequacy.
The demons are within us, and so is the divinity within us. The God and the devil are both, within the human being, all of those aspects. But we can choose to express on whatever spectrum of the polarity we want to express, from the most extreme enlightened divine side, or from the darkest power-driven, ego-driven denial of our divinity, denial of sameness of all people and all beings. We can express that way too. And you can go through history and see the people who've expressed at the extremes, and then most of us fall somewhere in the middle.
The biggest issue I see today, hands down across everything, the reason people, I believe, suffer so much, the reason there's so much comparison, feeling not enough, feeling not good enough, all of these these forms of suffering come from one root cause, which is that we over-identify with the ego.
What we must do is to aggressively love the ego. And when I'm here telling you that the ego is doing something super bad, the natural reflection for a human is to be like, all right, then we got to push the ego away. Mm-hmm. Well, that's how it wins right there. The ego is incredibly beneficial, but unless we really spend time to understand it and figure out how to meet its needs, and by doing so, come in as a kind of I'm caretaking the ego as a tool of my own, rather than it's this thing that runs me, we're not going to be able to make this transition happen.
To my great shame, I sort of succumbed to the narcissism and the self-involvement that comes along with that. Where for a while, I'm ashamed to say, I expected people to sort of know who I was and to treat me differently. And that it's not a healthy way to live. I mean, we look at our culture and there's so many public figures who are sort of destroyed by being public figures. It's not just confusing. Sometimes it brings out the worst parts of our personalities. So I am glad that I personally have sort of gone past that. We're I guess I'm still a public figure, but it's not necessarily how I think of myself on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Well, I think people regulate against the things that they're scared of themselves. And when the ego is in control, right? The ego is firmly in control. It's scared of the reevaluation. It's scared of losing its power seat running the human organism, right? It's almost like an entity that itself wants to survive by the belief of the organism that it exists in. Like the ego wants to be real. Like, I want to be a real boy.
Surface confidence is in the ego. So for me, it used to be like, look at my straight A's. It was all like my worth was in my grades, always my perfectionism. But the problem is out here is this swirl of dynamic change all the time. So if we pin our confidence to anything out here, it's always going to go up and down. So the true source of confidence, yoga teaches us, and when you peel away the layers and the layers and you keep going deeper and deeper, is one thing, Danica. It's very simple. Confidence in the very purest sense comes from I am. I'm here. I'm alive. I'm breathing. I'm a drop of consciousness. I'm spirit individualized, whatever word you want to use, the universe, whatever. But I am here. I am present. I am alive. And that is where the real confidence comes from. Mm-hmm. So a lot of us engage in this arduous pushing externally. The ego is like wanting to say, oh, well, you need to do more. You need to get more. Even the way we approach love, we think we need to get love from other people. We need to get this and this. And that's the ego playing out lack. And the opposite is when we realize that we are in charge of what we can work with is our inner state. Yeah. And it's this frequency inside of us. Abundance is really showing with the fullness of this moment. So we're here and we're present and we're breathing and we're not lacking anything. We're not comparing ourselves. We're not in ego identification. We are in connection with this essence inside of us. And then that repeated frequency over time starts to attract and create. People are drawn to you. People say, oh, what is this? What are you working on? They want to, opportunities come and more relationships, things get deeper. And I got deeper and deeper into this after my, rock bottom place about 4 years ago. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, it doesn't have to be as arduous and pushing and living from the ego as we've been led to believe. There's this whole other way of living.
How do we love the ego? How do we understand the ego?
You understand the value of having a self. You understand the value of the aspects of self. And by virtue of understanding the value, you know what place to put it in. I think the recognition of the ego is the first step. You can look at Buddhist monks, for example. You've got people who have taken themselves out of society, put themselves in a monastery, and they're practicing this for 80 years straight. It's even more difficult when you're in the world and you've got so many triggers for the ego. But the recognition of the ego, which is this perception of separate self, is the first step.
I think people just regulate against the stuff that they're afraid of.
Okay.
And so people who have strong egos were afraid of these things that were ego dissolving. And so, we outlawed those. But the consequences of that are that we don't have the tools to really resolve the traumas and really unwind some of these patterns. And I think that's the revolution that's coming with this next wave of psychedelic medicine.
And somehow I felt that, if people were nice to me, if people wanted to date me, if people invited me to their parties, it sort of gave me this external sort of validation. And as is often the case, I became way too attached to it. Because, I had grown up, my mom and I were on food stamps and welfare. I was, a little insecure kid growing up. And then suddenly when you're on the receiving end of attention, especially glamorous attention, it can be really corrupting. It's because it's so attractive.
So what is the ego? The ego is this part of us that's sensing with the 5 senses. So it's what we see with our physical eyes, including looking in the mirror, what we look like, what other people are doing on social media. It's always looking out, touching, hearing what's out here. We are having an embodied experience. We are here in a physical body. So of course we are going to have an ego to an extent where we need to be in the world. But the issue is when we put our full identity and our self-worth in this. So anytime you're saying to yourself, I don't feel good enough. You see something that triggers you, like someone walks by and you're like, oh, I should be 10 pounds lighter or whatever, or something happens, or, whatever. You see a social media post and you think whatever it is. It's important that first of all, in that moment you pause and that feeling comes up. You start to recognize it and you say, oh, I'm identifying with my ego in this moment. Fear is being an ego. Because if I'm an ego, I'm scared that, oh my God, I'm getting older. My body's going to break down. All this stuff's going to happen to me. Someone's going to outdo my stuff, my project at work. I'm not going to get the promotion. It's because we're still here all the time. It doesn't mean we're going to take steps. We're going to work on our skills. We're going to be in the world. But when we tune into the true self, this eternal part of us, we don't have the same fears that are taking over our life every day. And one of my other favorite chapters, Danica, is the warrior chapter, right? And this Sanskrit word is Kshatriya, this warrior part of us. In Yogananda's commentary, he says something, throw yourself into the din of battle and do not worry about results. So this means when we're living from our heart, when we are taking right action, dharma, so we've concentrated our energy and then we see where we want to put it, we go for it, we create. We're not riddled with fear of what if this doesn't work out? What if, they don't like me?